Welcome to the Two Stewards Show. Buying real estate at the exact right time is key if you'd like to significantly grow your ego. Just think of the popularity and praise you could garner from telling your friends that you bought right at the bottom just before it started going up and then sold right at the top just before prices started crashing again. Conversely, consider the pain and devastation to your self-esteem when you might possibly have to disclose to your friends that you are not a perfect human being with unparalleled prediction skills and possibly lack the supreme propensity to act at the precise moment to achieve perfect success in all areas of life, especially timing the real estate market. But even for those of us who aren't perfect, can't time the market, and couldn't care less about our ego, we have to admit we still want to capitalize on that perfect opportunity. Do you know a perfect opportunity when you see one? Is waiting to buy or sell real estate a good idea? What is indecision costing you? While you delay, property values appreciate, rental income is lost, and inflation continues to erode your savings. Should you wait to buy real estate or buy real estate and wait? Send in your criticisms and comments to hello@twostewards.ca. Get that monkey off your back. Don't be afraid to offend us. Our egos are damaged beyond repair at this point. Remember, this show is not financial advice, but is valuable for listening, amusement purposes, and now, the hidden cost of waiting to buy real estate.
Hello, folks. Welcome to the Two Stewards Show. My name's Mark, and I'm here with Brent.
Hi, Mark.
How are you, Brent?
Yeah, good. I feel like we should start recording before we start recording because it's always funnier, right? Before you start recording.
I mean, we think it's funnier.
Truly a better podcast before and after the podcast.
Maybe we'll do a behind the scenes or in front of the scenes. I don't know what that's called. Podcast. Anyway, it's good to have you back, Brent, from your...
gallivanting.
Your latest snowboard. I don't want to offend you. Snowboard trip.
I don't get super easily offended, but that's one thing where, no, actually, if anyone is a snowboarder in the audience, you got to message us and we'll just do a big Two Stewards snowboarding trip. Snowboarders only.
Oh, wow.
Can we be that exclusive?
That's discriminatory.
That's pretty niche, eh?
Yeah.
Fresh powder lines.
Yeah, maybe we'll do an episode on snowboarding someday.
Yeah.
Or skiing versus snowboarding.
That's actually...
Ooh, the hidden cost of waiting to go snowboarding.
Actually, I was thinking about this because, my bucket list, or are you even allowed to have bucket lists?
No.
I love to go heli skiing, but you can't say heli, you have to say heli snowboarding. It just doesn't sound the same. So you're like,
yeah.
Hi, I'd like to go on a heli snowboarding trip. Sorry, we don't do that. It's heli skiing. Like, okay. So that's like, top up there. I want to try this, but it's extra. You have to exercise, prepare and train or whatever, if you want to get the most out of it. In my head, I'm thinking,
Okay.
Hey, I should probably work out so that I can go, and not want to slow down, right? Or not be like, I can't go, my leg hurts. And, you paid all this money to go. But then it's like, I can't afford it. So maybe I'll go in 20 years when I'm, older. And it's like, well, maybe my body can't keep up. So should I wait to buy, there's a hidden cost there, man. But then the other hidden cost is if you do go earlier and when you're younger, then you get addicted and you want to go again the next time. It ends up being the cost is 20 times as much.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I don't do any.
Not to mention the hidden cost
activity
on your family and your marriage and all this, because it's eye-opening. We go on the slopes and everyone you talk to is, we're either retired or single or divorced or my ex, whatever. I'm like, yeah, okay, no kidding, because you're here for 6 weeks all alone snowboarding in the mountains. Like, what do you expect?
You just got to find someone who loves snowboarding as much as you.
I know it's
or a very patient wife.
That's what we're doing on the show. We're here advertising for snowboarders. Anyways,
well, that was a very good segue into the hidden cost of waiting to buy real estate.
Yeah. I was thinking about that too, because real estate on the mountain is tempting. Like, it'd be so nice to just have
Hamilton Mountain?
No, in the mountains. In the Rockies or whatever. Hey, that would be nice. But, maybe because if you buy it now, it's probably going to go up in value. And then you can use it. But it's also really expensive. But if you wait, then it'll probably be even more expensive. So that's what we want to get into today.
Okay, not necessarily about ski properties.
Yeah.
Although we are fans of those here at the Two Stewards Show.
You are too.
Yeah, I am. I mean, not for skiing myself, but just for renting out. But yeah, you got to find the next big.
So you're capitalizing
ski
on
opportunity.
like my addiction.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, that's I think one of the best ways you can invest, to find what people are addicted to and invest in that. I don't know. You can get into ethical investing there, I guess. But no, we do want to talk about, should you wait to buy real estate? Like what is the cost of that? And I guess there's a few different ways to look at it.
Yeah, because one is buying your primary residence.
Yeah.
And the other one is like a rental property, or
Yes.
I guess you could say vacation home or secondary property if you already own your primary residence. But
Yeah.
I would say what the question, should you wait to buy real estate, from our perspective, especially on this podcast, is more about like, you're trying to grow your wealth, you're trying to steward your wealth. It's not necessarily a vacation property. That's more like a personal decision and less of an investment decision.
Well, unless you rent it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then it's a rental property that you happen to frequent once a year.
Yeah.
That's what I call those.
Benefit, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that people are less averse to waiting to buy a primary residence versus the secondary. I think that's a much bigger, yeah, well, they view it as a bigger risk and a bigger step. Although there are arguments against buying primary residence as well, right? And so the argument against, I think we'll just jump right into it. The argument against that one is that you should not buy a home because it's going to cost you a lot of time and money in maintaining it, keeping it up and stuff. And instead, you should just rent somewhere that's affordable and then invest the difference into the stock market.
It's like saying you shouldn't buy a car because, you have to put gas in it every time it runs out of gas, or, you shouldn't live because you have to eat and go to the grocery store.
No, I mean, the car... so I'm not totally dismissing this argument out of hand. Right? I want to debunk it first. But no, I mean, there is some merit to it. And even like buying a car, you could make that argument too, right? Like, no, just get a bike. And then, so this is more, if you live in like New York City or downtown Toronto, right? Like maybe you don't need a car that often, right? Because everything you need is at hand, restaurants, groceries, like whatever. You could just walk. Or maybe take a taxi, or like if you need to get out of the city, you take an Uber.
I guess what I was being a little bit sarcastic in just that everything that is good has a cost to it, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Even in the Christian faith, right? Like our salvation came at a cost, not to us, but to Jesus, right?
Yeah.
That's like the example we can point to.
Yeah. But then there is a cost to living a Christian life. Right?
Yeah.
It means you forego certain things.
Yeah.
And, is that a cost?
That's also taking the example of Christ, right?
Yeah.
Upon ourselves.
Yeah. So,
But in this earth, like with our money and our wealth and our time, like you want a good marriage, there's a cost to that, right? It's sacrificing yourself. And same thing, if you want to own an asset, well, there will be cost and sacrifice, unless of course you just inherited the thing and someone else pays for it, but there is a cost there too, right? Like someone else had to work and build it up, and then they
and someone you're paying one way or another to maintain the thing.
Yeah.
Right. So, but I mean, so that is one of the arguments against owning a home, even like a primary residence, is all the work
every house
that is
has
associated
issues.
with it. Yeah, every house has issues. We were talking off air about like some rental properties, but even
some
like,
rats, some leaks, some
even
plumbing
personal
backups.
residences. Yeah, I mean, there's no denying it. If you own a home, then you're going to have to do some work, or you're going to have to pay someone to do work, to do maintenance. So that's one thing that I'm learning when we onboard new clients for the property management side, is that we tell them like, look, we're going to spend some money throughout the year maintaining this property.
Yeah.
And if we don't, we're not doing a good job. Because if you have a $0 maintenance budget for your home, unless it's like brand new, and even then there's still stuff that has to be done. Like even just changing furnace filters, right?
Yeah.
Or cleaning the gutters or whatever. There's no such thing as a $0 maintenance budget when you own a home. You should expect to see money as a client being spent on that, and if not, your property manager is like just letting things slide.
Yeah, or the tenants are picking up the slack, which is rare.
But very nice when they do.
Yeah. Thank you to all the good tenants
Yes.
who clean the gutters and fix the plumbing leaks.
Exactly.
They are out there. That's
Yeah.
the thing too. It's like, oh, I don't want a bad tenant. Yeah, some tenants are incredible.
Yeah.
And they never call you. They fix everything themselves. It's just too much of a hassle for them to call you and then wait for you to show up. And like, even if it's a half a day or whatever,
Yeah.
they can already fix the problem.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
They do exist.
But most of them would just rather live in squalor and wait for you to come.
Yeah.
But so that's one of the arguments is that you're going to spend a lot more than you think when you buy a home. It's not just the mortgage payment and insurance, but it's also maintenance and all that stuff. And then there's also a quality of life thing, I guess, which is that you could spend time cleaning out your eaves troughs, or you could spend that time, going snowboarding. I got to take a few shots here and there. And so then you take the money that you would have spent, I don't know if I already said this, but on mortgage, insurance, and maintenance, and you invest that. So my pushback against that is a few. Number one, just talking about discipline. Like, there are very, very few people who are disciplined enough to actually do that, to actually take the money that they would have spent on on the home, and then subtract the difference with rent, and then invest that every month.
So you're
without
talking
fail.
about one of the hidden costs of waiting to buy a property could be that, because you don't have you have a lack of discipline, you've chosen a different way to invest your money. You're kind of missing out on these forced savings.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole.
So it's kind of like an opportunity cost, or it's just because of your lack of self-discipline.
Well, so I'll just say, like, I'm very pessimistic about human nature, and most of us are not disciplined.
Yeah.
Oh, and it's just true.
You're
right?
realistic about human nature.
Realistic, fine.
Yeah.
Most people are not going to do that. And like the ones who do are the ones who end up writing the book saying, hey, you should do this.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, like some people can do it, and that works out. Because what we're talking about really is, getting one asset versus another kind of asset. So real estate versus stock holdings.
Yeah.
Right. And nothing against the stock. I mean, I have a little bit against the stock market, I guess, as your primary source of wealth. But I don't think it's really feasible for most people, because for most people, if you have some kind of emergency, well, you're going to figure out how to deal with that. If you have a mortgage to pay, you're always going to pay the mortgage. You're not going to not pay the mortgage. Whereas if you have, so I don't know, let's say your car stops running or something, you're going to like get rides, you're going to learn to fix it yourself, you're going to do whatever, but you got to make that mortgage payment. Whereas
you can get creative with,
exactly.
with your other
because
expenses.
You're forced to.
Yeah. And that's what economizing is, right? Where you're taking your available resources,
Yeah.
and you're deciding how to use them best.
Yeah.
And that essentially stewardship is the same principle, right? Like, look at what I all have. What are the goals here that we're trying to get to? What can we do to get there? Okay, how much risk am I willing to take on? Let's take action. Because I agree, and I think indecision itself has a price, right? If you're waiting to buy real estate, just that period of not deciding something has a price to it, right? If you're kind of thinking, like I'd love to buy. Are we talking about rental properties? I didn't say we talk about rental properties.
Okay.
You're waiting to take the money you have and invest it in a rental property. That period of time, you're actually foregoing a lot of learning, right? And you just won't know how much learning you can have over that. Let's say you wait for 5 years.
Yeah.
Well, in 5 years, you could have 5 different tenants. You could have learned what a good tenant and a bad tenant is firsthand in a real way that you can't just teach someone some of these things, right?
Yeah.
I mean, of course, you can learn the hard way, and that's the risk. So that's the cost of buying real estate rashly. But waiting has this cost too, right? And I guess they missed appreciation, no rental income, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, so just getting back to the home ownership side, and then we'll talk about the rental as well, right? Yeah, the fact is you're always going to pay your mortgage. And so again, if your car breaks down, you figure out ways around that, but you still pay your mortgage, as opposed to if you're renting and investing the difference, it's much more likely that you're just going to fix the car because like you need it. It's a hassle without it. Done. So that means that month's investment or a couple months could be gone, right? You're stressed out. You need a vacation. Well, if you got a mortgage, you're going to pay the mortgage. You're not going to be like, I'm not going to pay the mortgage this month, then I'm going to go on vacation. Whereas if you have that available cash, it's just so much easier to be like, you know what? I'll skip this month or the next couple of months because like I'm worth it, right? And I'm stressed out, whatever, So it's just that temptation is too hard. So I don't think it's feasible for most people to do that.
You have to say that in your other voice. I'm so stressed out. Just.
And so I did a comparison of on the investment side of things. So you already own a property, you're going to buy an investment property. And because like that one, I'll debunk a little more firmly, maybe that you're going to do better off just investing that money in the stock market. So let's say you have, let's look at some actual numbers here for a second. In this handy reference guide that
You, Me, and Airbnb by Mark Cricky and his wife, Kirsten.
Yeah. So the scenario is you have $100,000. And so
it's a good scenario. Hey, good?
Yeah, not bad. No, but you've saved up $100,000 and we'll talk about like how do you actually save that up later. But so this is a little bit outdated because I said, imagine you want to buy a house worth $500,000. That's going to be a little bit tough in Canada, but
it depends.
Depends where you are. So down payment of $100,000. So I'll save you all the calculations, but you're putting out $100,000, and then we go through like property tax, maintenance, mortgage, down payment, land transfer tax, and then we look at cash flow. And we're assuming 5% equity growth in the property. So that's key.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit lower than historical averages, but we wanted to be a little bit lower. And then we did for the stock market investment at 10 years, so $113,000 because we added the land transfer tax. So it's $113,000 you got. So at 10% growth over 10 years, $113,000, you have about $260,000. So
let's just say the numbers again. So if you bought a house
with $113,000,
yeah,
right. So that covers your $100,000 down payment and some other fees plus your land transfer tax.
Because you're trying to compare apples to apples as much as possible.
Yeah, exactly. So at the end, if you sold that home, so the property would be worth around $815,000. So that's 10 years at 5% growth in equity, which is, that's not entirely unreasonable and a little bit low. So you end up, once you pay everything off, your realty fees, et cetera, $407,000. And with the 10 years in the stock market at 10%, you get $260,000. So right there, it kind of blows it out of the water, right? And then you could say, well, even what if you didn't have cash flow? That's about $36,000 you could take off. You're still ahead. So the other thing I'll say,
case closed.
Case closed. Bam.
So.
I slammed the book on the table. The other one I'll just say for people touting the stock market, right? Because they'll look at, so the S&P 500, Standard & Poor's 500, is the one that is often quoted, right? And depending on the period you look at, it's 10, 11, 12% that it returns over the last 20, 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
So that's great. If you had a portfolio of the top 500 stocks in the S&P and rebalance them all the time, like nobody does that is what I'm saying, right? Almost everybody will. If you're buying stocks, you're buying a few favorite stocks and you're just opening yourself up to way more volatility, right? You could buy an index fund that tracks the S&P 500. So let's say the S&P does 10% over that time. Well, you're still paying a management fee to them of, who knows, is it 0.5%? Some of them are like 0.01% or 0.09. But you're lessening your return there with those management fees, unless you're studiously investing in just those companies. But like, nobody ever does that either. So if you're a professional stock picker, maybe you can do better. But if you're not, you're just not. You're going to get killed, right? Like, as we speak, I think Tesla is down 50% or something, right? So if you own Tesla stocks, you're like, yeah, great. And if you've owned it for 10 years, even though it's down 50%, you're still laughing. But if you bought it like last week,
yeah,
not so much.
Not great.
So there's volatility in real estate too. I get that, but it's more pronounced and much harder for the average person to do well, I would argue, in stock investing than in real estate, because you have to make those payments, and things don't change that much, right? Other than your interest payments if you're on variable, or every 5 years.
Yeah, so I think you made a good case for real estate versus other assets, just in that kind of comparison. And you kind of hinted at that there's skill level involved, right, and dedication, like if you're good at one thing versus the other. But for the average person, real estate's good. So let's take that as a premise, but then moving forward, if somebody's indecisive or not pulling the trigger, what are the actual consequences of that, right? Because if you're waiting to get into the market, your savings basically have to keep up with inflation, and if you get into the market, you're benefiting from the house price appreciation, right? That's kind of the principle that we're looking at. Yeah. So you can either get on sooner and ride this wave or not. And I think for people who can't afford to get on, right, that's a totally different conversation. Yeah. Like what we're really trying to focus on is people who actually can buy an asset.
There is a period
or
too,
sacrifice
while
something
you're saving up to get to that point.
Yeah.
Right. And because you don't necessarily need to have $100,000 either. Right. Even if the house is worth, like if it's your primary, right? If it's not, you're doing 20% down. But if it's a primary residence, you can do it for 5%, let's say. But you still have to save up that money to get to that point. So yeah, what do you do that, right? Where do you put that money? But I guess what you're saying is, if you have that money and you're just like, and I mean, I think we've both probably talked to people who've been in that boat where they've had the money saved up, and they have, what do they call it? Analysis paralysis. Yeah. Where they're just like looking at deals. And I've worked with a few clients like that, and I'm learning not to, but where like, they're like, oh, what do you think about this house? And then what do you think about that house? I'm like, yeah, they were all good. Just buy one, right? Like you can't just buy one. I'm not saying that. You have to buy the right property, because you can screw this up if you buy the wrong property. But at some point, like, you got to get your feet in the water.
Well, because this is the thing, right? Every decision that you make is going to have trade-offs, right? Yep. It's not going to be a perfect decision. So you're going to make a mistake or some scale, right? It's either going to be a minor mistake, like, oh, we could have done that a little bit better. Or, if we had just waited one more month, that would have been perfect, right? Like, well, nobody has ever made a perfect decision. So no. This is stewardship in this side of eternity, right? Is gathering all the information that you can, educating yourself as much as possible, and making the decision that is wise, right? Like you can't have all the information out there in existence and make a perfect decision. Yeah. So trying to calculate it, and never acting. I think you get the most. Because when you're calculating and running numbers and trying to decide whether this or that is good, you're really going off of other people's actions, right? You're going off of other people's decisions, right? That's what the market is. It's that guy bought a house and that's the price he paid for it. Yeah. Right? Well, you didn't learn. He learned something, right? He learned that, okay, this house is worth this much to me. Actually, I probably would have paid a little bit less, or I actually really like this house. I feel like I got a good price on it, and like, look at all the things I can do with my backyard and my basement and whatever, right? So everybody has a different kind of perspective, and you're not when you're making all these calculations, you're really not learning the same as if you were to just take action, buy the thing, and then figure it out. And talking to Gideon, our wonderful producer, Gideon.
He's wonderful.
Yeah. He's also in the room. Who recently, bought a house, renovated, and he's saying to me like, oh, I learned so much more in the last 6 months doing this all than working in the industry for the last few years, right? And just reading about it, studying it, watching other people do it, talking to other people who have done it. Like, you can learn and avoid a lot of mistakes, but unless you actually do something,
you at some point you have to put it into practice. Like, I agree that
that goes back to your paying the mortgage thing, right? Like, everybody's going to pay their mortgage because they know that if they don't pay the mortgage, well, there's consequences, right?
Yeah, exactly. But like, I will say, you should have a good team, right? If you're going to get into, if you want to do some real estate investing, you have to make the decision, but you should also learn as much as you can from other people.
So just don't, I guess the point is, like, don't discount all the analysis, but don't let the analysis stop you from taking an action, because at some point, like, you're going to have all the information that a human being can gather, right?
Yeah.
I guess with AI, you can just infinitely gather all the information. But everyone else is doing the same thing, right? And that's what a marketplace is everybody's trying to make an optimized decision for themselves. That's what economics is, right? It's just, you have limited time. I have limited time. You have, limited relationships and labor and whatever. And we're all trying to do the best we can with what we have. We're trying to economize it. We're trying to steward it.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Yes, you've got me at a loss for words, Brent.
Yeah. Indecision. Just start a podcast, folks.
Even
if you're not good at it.
Yeah, and maybe after 2 years, you're still not good at it, but just keep on going. That's our that's our motto. No, there is something to be said just in life for, I don't want to be a corporate pander to corporate interest, but like the Nike motto, just do it, right? At some point you have to get off the sidelines and actually play the game, or whatever analogy, at some point you have to get out of the helicopter and snowboard down the mountain.
It's more like at some point you have to get in the helicopter to go back up. Oh man.
Yeah. Right. But there is something to that where, like, you have to take action at some point, and people are so afraid of making the wrong decision. And so, as someone who's made a lot of wrong decisions, once you make a bunch of them, you're not as afraid of it, because you learn to mitigate risk. And then, hopefully you're not making like huge wrong decisions.
The easiest way to make a right decision is to make a wrong one and then make the right one after. I don't know.
Well, that's what experience is, right?
Yeah.
Experience is just a whole bunch of bad decisions.
Yeah.
Right? If you only ever did the right thing,
I was pillow fighting my kids last night, and the one guy bonked his eye off the toy box and had to go for stitches. Well, I guess we're not going to be doing that again. But you would never have known if you hadn't done a pillow fight. So.
Yeah, so now you know. Well, but it's just like, raising kids where you have certain rules, because not because you're so smart. I mean, maybe you've learned from other people, but most of them are just like, well, your brother, put his hand on the stove when he was 3, and you're just as dumb as him. So I'm going to make a rule that, like, you don't touch the stove, as an example, right? Yeah. But that just comes from experience and making those decisions. So be as informed as you can, but then at some point you got to get in, and in this case, we're talking about real estate. You got to go buy that property and then be prepared to deal with the consequences, right? If you're not prepared to deal with, I don't know, whatever it is. So whether that's, toilets and tenants, at least have a team that is ready to do that. So maybe that's just a good property manager, plug in the property managers over here. But no, I mean, that is a route that some people go, right? They do their research, analyze the deals, they get it, and then they will hand it over to someone because they don't have the time or the inclination to deal with, filling the unit, finding a good tenant, and dealing with the maintenance. Yeah. But that's a pretty good.
So here's an interesting cost that it doesn't apply to everybody certainly, but some people like, I want to save up to buy a house. But you're probably in the best financial position. So I've seen this with a few kind of middle-aged couples, I guess. Middle-aged, I don't know, like, mid-30s to mid-40s. That's not
middle-aged.
Like middle-aged when it comes to home buying careers.
Okay. Changing definitions here.
Yeah. It's like politics. So but they have pretty low debt, right? They have no student debt, no car debt. They have two people working. So it's a husband and wife or whatever. And
I mean,
well, because some of these couples aren't married, so
I get you.
But their jobs are bringing in really healthy incomes, and one of their excuses or reasons for not investing it in real estate or buying a house or whatever is, we're trying to save up a down payment for, a specific style family home, right? They have this really high, lofty kind of like, I want to be in this really nice area of this city. And, I'm not going to do anything until I get to that.
I want to live where my parents live now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not where they started out.
So the expectations or whatever are kind of hindering you from taking action, which is kind of different. But what they might also run into, what they don't realize, which is important to point out, is that your income could change, right? So you could lose your job, or your job could go out of existence because of AI. Or in one person's case, they started a business. Right. So they toned down their hours at their T4 job, and now they started a business, which financially they're bringing in a little bit more income, which is great. Right. It took a year or two, but now they can't qualify for loans.
Yeah.
So they kind of missed their window of qualifying for a mortgage. And so that home ownership thing just kind of went further and further out into the future, right? Like they're going to need to show the bank their business income is healthy for a couple of years, and then they're going to be left with, lower quality financing or whatever. So that is a cost that maybe not everyone thinks about. So not everyone is a business owner or aspires to be, but that does have a cost, right?
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about assets or building assets, I mean,
when are we ever talking about that?
Probably starting a business is like the number one thing. I would place that if you were so inclined, if you can do it and be successful. If you're not successful, then it's not a very good idea at all. But no, I mean, I would say like if you have the desire, the inclination, like do that above all else, rather than buying real estate, buying Bitcoin, buying stocks, buying whatever, right? With your time and your energy, like do that, try that. If it doesn't work, well, now you've got some experience. But that is the, just in terms of building wealth, that's the quickest way that I have seen for people to build wealth. Is to start a business and build it that way, right? So yeah, works for some, doesn't work for others, but for the ones that it works for, it's more effective than probably anything else. I mean, you could say, real estate or Bitcoin has had the best returns of anything.
Yeah.
But I still don't know if that would compare to having a business, especially if you're starting from nothing. Because that's the beauty of a business, is that you can start from nothing and build it up into something that is producing income and can get assets.
Yeah,
and all
no,
that
I would agree 100% on the business front, and it's not easy, but
no,
it does have the ability to generate income, whereas real estate is somewhere where you kind of put your income or your wealth and then kind of grow it in a leveraged way. Kind of, I say hands-free because you're still doing property management and maintenance and stuff, but a lot less than an active business.
If you're a competent person,
yeah,
it's not like, it ain't that hard, right? Mow your lawn, clean the house, replace the roof every 10, 20 years.
So I got to bring up this article because, so there's an article by Rick Edelman. It's from the States as a financial advisor, and he has 10 great reasons to carry a big, long mortgage. And, I was listening to him talk a little bit, and so like we've talked on the show about how your house or a rental property is like, is it an asset or a liability, right?
Right.
So Rich Dad, Poor Dad, like Robert Kiyosaki, his premise is that assets put money in your pocket, liabilities take them out. So if it's a primary home, primary residence, that's not something that generates income for you, so it's a liability.
Yeah.
But if it's a rental property and it's cash flow positive, it's actually putting money in your pocket. Well, that is an asset, right? And so his whole thing is, take as much of your income and buy assets with it, so that the assets start generating more income, so that you can kind of just live off of the passive cash flow of that. And then one of the side benefits of owning assets is that they increase in value, right? So Rick Edelman says, admit it. If you were certain that your house would fall in value, you wouldn't buy it, you'd rent instead. So you're buying your home because you think it will rise in value over time. So that's true, right? And that's why we're talking about, like, the cost of waiting is you're not on the train of house prices rising over time. And it's not like a 2-year period, right? Because we've seen house prices fall in the last couple of years. And, they've fallen, but if you also look back further, they've fallen from a previous all-time high, right? They just kind of overshot up. And so if you zoom out the 30-year timeline or even longer, you can kind of see these asset prices just slowly grinding up. But anyways, Rick Edelman makes the kind of argument that your mortgage is actually an asset. So that might kind of throw people for a loop, right? Because, the house, like, I want to buy a house. House is an asset. This rental property I have is an asset. And I think you've mentioned right off the top of the show about, maintenance and repairs, and that budget can't be zero. Well, that just implies that the house itself, like the physical property, the house, that's deteriorating over time. That's actually a liability. Mm-hmm. Like, it's going to cost you money every year to upkeep that house, whereas the debt on it can be seen as the asset.
Okay.
So, would you agree with that? We can kind of go through some of his reasons. So I guess he's saying, like, it's not like you should just go and buy the most expensive home you can possibly get, and then just get this massive mortgage, right?
Yeah.
Like, his premise is still you should buy the least expensive home that you can afford, or that you're willing to live in, right? So go find, the area where, close to your work or whatever, like far enough commute away from your work that you're like, okay, I'm willing to live here and commute there, right? Like, basically sacrifice as much as you can.
Yeah.
And, but then once you buy that house, get the biggest loan. And I think, especially for the older generation, that's like, are you crazy? Like, why would you get such a big mortgage? The idea in previous generations has always been, okay, put as much money down on the house, pay it bi-weekly, pay it daily if you can, right? Pay extra payments, pay a lump sum thing, get that thing gone, pay a 15-year loan instead of a 25 or a 20 or a 30. That's crazy. Yeah. Or now it's, 50 or 55 with CMHC. And, we've talked on the show about 80-year loans, whatever, lifetime mortgages. But yeah, the whole idea from that generation is, pay this off. And it's interesting, like, it goes back to the stock market crash in the 1929, where, the market crashed and the banks go after their, the people that they borrowed money to, right? So they say, oh, well, like, I gotta.
Well, a lot of people were leveraged on stocks.
Yeah. So they have to.
So then they had to get all their available resources from the bank.
Yeah. So then the bank goes, oh, we need available resources. And they go to their debtors and they go, okay, all you guys who have mortgages, pay your mortgages. So and
farms, I will point out. I was just listening to an audio version of The Grapes of Wrath.
Yeah.
And that's charting, talking about, like, these tenant farmers who are displaced because of this whole thing, right? And I never really put two and two together, like, why the banks were so ferocious in repossessing farms, but it's because they could.
Yeah.
Right? You can't do that now, at least on the homes side of things.
So that is one big thing that has changed since that era, where the whole idea of paying down your debts was prudent.
Yeah.
Right? Because there was this huge risk that if you didn't pay off your mortgage and then the bank called the loan.
Yeah.
Because in the 29, 30s, when the bank runs kind of happened, they went to people who had mortgages and said, well, pay your mortgage in full.
Yeah.
Or whatever. And
And they
I
couldn't.
can't. Yeah, well, here's my farm or here's my property.
Yeah.
And that just makes things really bad. So now they've kind of changed the rules where the banks can't call those loans. So if a bank can't call the loan, what is the risk to the guy who holds the loan, right? The average person like you and me who buys a property or a farm or whatever and leverages into it. And really it's just the month to month. Like, can you make the next payment?
Yeah.
And the banks can't say, like, if you pay that payment, the banks can't say anything until the next payment. So that's a bit of a change, and it changes the risk of a mortgage. And it almost, that's one of the reasons I would say that a mortgage could be an asset.
Well, like the whole reason that we like real estate, I mean, number one, there's utility value, and like people will always need somewhere to live. So that's a good thing too. And like, investing is something that people always need is good, but really it's about the debt. Like really and that's the reason that house prices go up, right? We've talked ad infinitum on this podcast about money printing, money creation, inflation, all that stuff. That's what makes real estate valuable. And, I will say the stock market as well is really most of the real value, because people aren't just buying. A lot of people do not focus on dividend paying stocks that are like value and all that jazz. But in any case, like that's the real value in real estate. And that's why I think I would tend to agree with this guy that the house itself isn't the asset, because if house prices never went up, well, that's a whole different ball game for real estate investing. Now it's solely on cash flow. And that, like, it completely changes the picture. But because we know the governments are going to continue to inflate the money supply, and then that's going to be reflected in the price of assets like real estate, that's why it's so attractive.
Over the long term.
Yeah. So then it makes sense that you would have the cheapest debt possible for the most asset.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Rick Edelman makes the point here that mortgages offer you perhaps the cheapest way to borrow. And you think about that compared to other ways you can borrow, right? You can borrow on your credit card. Okay, well, it's 18, 20, whatever, 100% payday loans. I don't know. Which payday loans are tricky, by the way, because they charge you an interest rate that looks, okay, well, it's only 14 or 18%, but that's in 2 weeks. Yeah. So it compounds. So it's like, hundreds of percent. So, a loan, low interest rate loans are backed by collateral that is long-term and reliable and secure, right? So basically, if you have a credit card loan, the reason it's so high is because there's no collateral. Like, how do they know? What are they going to do? Take your groceries and cash? Like, oh, you didn't pay your credit card bill. Hand me that bag of buns over there and that sweater you bought, right? The collateral is not there, and it's really risky, right? They kind of have to go based on you as a person. Like, are you, what's your credit record? What's your history? Have you paid this off? Whereas with a mortgage, you actually have like a kind of a proven asset class. You have a large marketplace. You have, this thing that, like you said, has some utility value as well, and some utility value. Yeah, people live in them. And the bank can take that and sell it, and that collateral gives a lot of security to the loan, so you can get really, really cheap interest rates. So mortgages are cheap money. So if you had access, like if you think about it, just if you had access to cheap money, would you not want to use that cheap money to invest, right? And so paying off your cheap money by paying your mortgage down faster is not really the greatest idea.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're just going to get another mortgage at a cheaper rate.
Yeah.
Right, or a line of credit or something. I mean, yeah, I'm thinking what you're saying, like access to cheap money. Like that's for business, that's important as well, right? If you're doing, like if you're growing and you need to do some capital expenditures, right? And maybe you don't have the money, but you can see where it's going to return, or you need to buy more trucks or equipment or whatever, right? That's like, you're not going to get the same rates as you would on a mortgage. for business capital.
Well, because what is the lender going to look at, right? Oh, unless you have other assets that you can post as collateral and that are really pristine.
Yeah.
But for some reason, our culture has just made real estate out to be this thing that, lenders are willing to lend on, and it's just a
I think
oiled system.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, it's established and it's
filled with fraud and corruption.
It is, but it's tangible, right?
Yeah.
There's an asset they can take, and as long as their loan to value is good.
So if we're talking about one of the hidden costs of waiting, it could be that you're just not getting access to cheap money, not getting a mortgage, right? Yeah. And we've had Tom Karadza on, and he talks about, that money is the money that is created first into existence. And when you're getting access to that money, you're really going to be basing everyone else's currency. Well, there's a moral dilemma. I think you brought this up earlier off air.
Yeah, I mean, so maybe that's one of the strongest arguments against having mortgages, is that you are contributing to inflation, essentially, because when you get a mortgage, that's made up money that the bank just puts on their balance sheet. I don't buy that. I think you have to work within the system that we're in, as long as there's not outright, slavery or murder or something like that. But there are a number of Christian thinkers, authors, podcasters who say, no, you should just get out of that corrupt system as quickly as you can. So I don't necessarily agree, but I wouldn't discount that. And I would value that as probably a good, if you have a good moral objection to getting a mortgage, okay, I get that and I can respect that. But for us, we're working in, we're working with the system that we have, right? And so, yeah, it's cheap money. And as the price of your home rises, whether it's your home or an investment property, you have more access to capital, right? So,
yeah, that's a big thing.
We looked at, I looked at 2015 average home price in Hamilton was $334,000.
Yeah.
Now that average price is $812,000. Right? That's just over 10 years. And so that's been, through COVID, it was probably up to $1 million, and it's come back down. So there's volatility, but I didn't work out the
interest rate?
The interest rate on that, but it was certainly more than 10%. But the point is, if you had bought that house, so let's say you had a $300,000 mortgage or whatever, well, now it's worth $800,000. Well, you have access to more capital. I'm not saying you should just go get a bigger mortgage or get a line of credit, but you can if you need to do other things. And I think Rick Edelman also makes the point that, okay, so you could take a line of credit and then go invest that. And maybe it's in the stock market. Maybe it's in another property, right? You have to be careful not to be too over leveraged. Because he's American.
Yeah.
And so they'll have 30-year mortgages, 30-year terms.
Yeah, fixed rate.
For 30 years. So you have a lot more certainty, whereas we're 2, 3, 4, 5 year terms, right? So as we have found out, it can make a big difference, what interest rates are from one period to the next. So you have to be wise with that. But there's a huge pile of capital, potential cheap debt that you have access to. And again, with let's say stocks or something, you don't really have that unless you're a very high net worth individual, like you own Apple or Tesla or whatever, right? So now, banks will loan Elon Musk money, and that's a pretty smart way to do it, actually. He doesn't actually have to sell his stocks. He'll just take a loan, and guess what? It's a loan, so if you sell your stock, if you sell your stocks, well, there's a capital gain. If you get a loan against the value of them, well, that's a loan, and even the interest is tax deductible, right? And you just have to keep up the payments on the loan, or maybe it's a 0%, I don't know. And then at some point, he could sell his stocks to pay it off if he needed to, but do it this way, you never pay any tax on it. So now for most, if you've got a $100,000 stock portfolio, you're probably not going to get a loan against that. But for higher net worth individuals, that's a possibility.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just like you say, that access to cheap debt is important, and that's because we live in a debt-based system. Yeah. Back in the 30s, different paradigm, right? pay it off because the ones who owned the debt could squeeze you. But now there's different rules in place.
Yeah. And U.S. as mortgage interest is tax deductible, even on your primary residence.
Even on your primary. That's a
But in
beautiful
Canada, we are behind the
thing.
times.
It's a beautiful thing. Yes, we are. We certainly are.
But with rental properties, the interest
Yes.
is deductible. So it's there is some incentive there, similarity. Yeah, we're halfway there. Or quarter way. I don't know. Our quarter of the properties, rental properties.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you are looking to buy an investment property and you're thinking about waiting, well, one other factor is that mortgage interest is tax deductible on that.
Yeah. Well, and whatever other costs you incur, right? So yeah, you're going to incur some costs, but if you have income, you can put those costs against your income. So that's pretty cool. And I just want to say that the average Hamilton home at $812,500, which sounds ridiculous to say that's the average home, but it is. And, do your research for your market, but this is just an example of sort of a middle of the road market. Even at 5% price growth in 10 years, that's now just over 1.3 million in value, which is that's crazy. So again, for the average person, I'm
going to pick on that word that you used,
which
value. Well, 1.3 million in value and versus price, right? Because you could argue, well,
made up Canadian dollars.
Is it really valuable? But it's $1.3 million today. But in
today's dollars,
in 10 years from now, 1.3 might actually mean a lot of different things. So it might be hard to put yourself in that frame of mind. Like, think of yourself 10 years from now, and the cost of a house, what did it not quite double, but if the cost of everything else went up quite significantly too, and your income went up, well, 1.3 million might not mean as much as it does today.
It might not, but what we've seen is that home prices have outpaced most
the average consumer goods and incomes.
Yeah. So
yeah.
And again, just look at the rate of money creation or expansion of the money supply, and that's pretty closely mirrored by home prices. So, you can make the argument that you're just sort of keeping up, which, okay, I'd buy that, but almost nothing else will let you keep up. Right? Maybe stocks, Bitcoin, yep. But this is also a performing asset, right? You're getting some cash flow out of it, hopefully.
Yeah, you had some notes around societal impacts. You want to jump into that?
I think so. I think we beat the economic stuff to death. Some of the societal impacts of not owning a home or waiting to own a home. So one thing we've talked about it with Joey from Canadian Bitcoiners a couple episodes ago, was late family formation, right? We've seen, and I read the whole report from MacDonald Laurier Institute or something, which we'll probably do in another episode. But just, the average age of women having children has increased. The average number of children that women are having has decreased. So not only are we having less children, but we're having them later. And then that the later corresponds to family formation as well, right? So marriages and families being formed are happening much, much later than they used to. And so one of the reasons that people give for that, and I don't know if I think it is a reason. I don't think it's a good reason, but it's the price of homes and, cost of living in general, but the price of homes most certainly affects that. And so that's what a lot of people will cite is that we can't start a family until we buy a home. So we have a place to raise our children, and I can't buy a home until I'm 40. So ipso facto, I can't start a family until I'm 40, right?
Yeah.
So I don't buy that, but we have a different sort of view. As Christians, I think we have a different viewpoint on that, right? You don't need to wait to start having children for external reasons or whatever, because they're their own blessing, and that's something we should be doing if we are if we're going to be forming a family, right? If you're single, then no. But then don't have a lot of children. That's another problem we can talk about but later. But that is one impact that we've seen on society. So whether we agree with it or not, it's happening, right? Family formation is being delayed.
I wonder how much of that is expectations, right? And you mentioned, I want to live in a house like my parents.
Yeah.
Is that just an expectation that these younger people who are starting to have kids are having? I can't do this until I have all these amenities in place for my kid.
Why would I want to bring my child into a tough situation?
Yeah, or even a less than ideal situation. Like they might be living in a comfortable home that they rent, and it might have 3 bedrooms, for example.
Yeah.
And, husband, wife living there and 3 bedrooms, and they don't want to have kids for career or whatever personal reasons. You're saying it could be because of housing, but if it's because of housing in that situation, well, like you'll go back a generation, they would have filled those rooms up with 4 kids each, right? Like this would have been great. Look at all the space we have. We have an extra bedroom. Like nobody sleeps in that room. We need four heads on beds. So maybe the expectations have changed. And I was just reading about Henry Hazlitt, Economics in One Lesson, and there's a comment about rent controls in that book, and he talks about how people might think rent control is a good idea because you're setting the price at one that is affordable for people, right? And I guess there's a societal consequence to that too, because you kind of this is what it should cost to live,
right?
And this is the standard of living that it should be, right? And it's kind of like, okay, the government just puts this arbitrary thing out. And well, you can't go more than that because that's just what it should be. Okay, well, that's just my expectation now, right?
Yeah.
But you're really not letting the market play out. And he gave the example, I think, during the war when there's an influx of population because they're like soldiers are coming to a certain area, and all of a sudden there's twice as many people, and then the government might come in and say, hey, like let's rent control this because we don't want it to be unaffordable for people. But basically you're just saying to the people who already live there, okay, you're good and locked in, and all these other people can't. What would really happen in the market if you just let it play out is, prices would go up. It would incentivize people to build more rental housing, and people would lower their expectations, right?
Yeah.
Like you'd be thankful to find a place that you can bunk up with some other person or whatever and share half the space because just you have a place now, right? You don't have to go drive 2 hours to some other town or whatever. This is where you want to live. And that's changing in expectations, right? But I think the real marketplace, without interference from, these kind of policies top down, if you just let that play out, you would see, okay, I actually want to invest in this area and build more housing in this area because there's a lot of demand here. But the people who demand that area might say, look, I really want to live here. I'm going to have to lower my expectations and change. So I think I wonder how that ties into family formations, because if people's expectations are, I need a big house to have a family.
Yeah, 100%.
Is that just cultural?
I think that's it too, right? People aren't waiting to buy that small starter home, right? They're waiting to buy the nice big new home with granite countertops and, not like the crummy starter thing where you just fix it up as you go. I think that's definitely a part of it. But I mean, that's our society, right? But I also think it's like you're settling down, you're making a big commitment to, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe,
scary.
It's scary. Maybe we should actually get married instead of living common law, right? There's just that whole sort of infantilization of society as well, right? Where adulthood.
Should we really grow up?
Yeah, adulthood is delayed.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that everybody who doesn't buy a house is not an adult. Don't come at me with that. But I think it's like there's a cumulative effect, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, there's other things as well, right? It's a little more consumeristic, right? We're becoming very accustomed to owning nothing and renting everything, right? Which has its own effects where, okay, then goods are not Like, I'm just going to rent it and then give it back. So the quality of the goods doesn't really matter, right? So do you want to buy a good quality home, or you just want to rent somewhere and like whatever? If it's no good, I'll move because like I don't own it, right? And then maybe I won't take care of the place because I'm just renting. I mean, we see you talked about some tenants are excellent and they really take care of stuff, but like a lot of them aren't. And if you don't do the maintenance, they ain't going to do it. And they may not even tell you. You only find out when you go there for an inspection, right?
Yeah.
That something's broken.
Oh, sometimes it's an attitude thing where they definitely know how to do it, but they just choose not to because they're the tenant. And that, like, fair enough, but it's also just like...
It's a little annoying. But I think that's another of the societal impacts of decreasing rates of home ownership, is that you see it spills over into other things as well. Because it's such a major commitment, buying a home, right? We talk about neighborhoods, right? So if you're just renting, like I have neighbors that I have seen, like actually visibly seen maybe twice, like next door to me. Like they are like, unless I think the only time I've ever seen them, and it's a duplex next door. So the one neighbor's like, we talk to them, like we know most of our neighbors. But these ones, they are like drive home, go in the house. If there was a garage, you would not see them ever, right? But they just go in and boom, right? And, maybe they're solitary and maybe if they owned a home, you wouldn't see them either. But I think you're much less likely to see that, right? When people own homes, you get to know your neighbors. You have a little bit of civic pride, right? Neighborhoods maybe are a little bit safer, right? Because the neighbors that we do know, we just keep an eye and we kind of know their habits, and if something's out of place or if their kids are coming over to play, or everybody sort of keeps an eye on the kids when they're out. You don't, if it was all simply just rentals, which I mean, as landlords or property managers, we're in this market, but that's just, again, working with the system we have. Right. But if neighborhoods where it's all rentals, they have a different feel, like 100%.
Yeah.
So yeah,
can't quite put my finger on it, but yeah, they do.
Well, because they're like, what is the incentive for you to get to know your neighbors if you're only there for a few years, or to make sure that your lawn is really mowed nicely because your neighbor does it? And like, you don't want to be the jerk who has the messy house on the block or whatever, right? Like, you don't care if you're renting. That's like you said, you have the ability to do these things, but I have some people who are like, oh, the garden's not being
you don't have the
very
same
well.
responsibilities.
Yeah. Like, oh, the garden. I'm like, well, if you want a nice garden, go like.
So what you're saying is
flowers.
that people should have more responsibilities. And to tie this all back to what we're actually talking about, which is the hidden cost of waiting to buy real estate, is that if you wait, you're actually prolonging the time from when you can get responsibilities, which actually teach you all these values. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it benefits society. Like,
I'm trying to connect it all together.
Yeah, no, that's very good work, Brent. Hooking me back in. No, a society without responsibility versus a society that embraces responsibility is just going to be a healthier, better society for people to live in, to be able to raise children, just to be able to live, whatever.
I would agree, but would you say that is why you should buy real estate soon?
I mean, I think it's one. We're talking about impacts on society.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. It's an effect. I mean, it would be great if everybody did, but I'm not going to say for the good of society you must buy a home, right?
for your safety and security.
But yeah, this is what you see. I mean, we have the American dream as well. Maybe just talk about that quickly because I put it in the notes. Right. You have these feelings of hopelessness, which is much more prevalent now among younger people. And that's not just related to home ownership, but part of it is like when people want to buy a home, then they're like, wow, I can't. Like, I just can't, right? And there's other reasons for this, but it's sort of the American dream context, right? In Europe, for example, which we're kind of familiar with, rates of rental, like it's normal to rent. And it's normal to like just never buy a home. You find a good place to rent and you stay there for a long, long time. And maybe like your parents rented and then they passed on and now you rent that place, right? That's your home.
Yeah, you almost come to a dead end if you're pursuing an American dream or whatever, and then you realize it won't be possible for you. And it's like,
Yeah.
well,
But it's different expectations. So then if you don't have those expectations, you're less likely to become depressed when you can't achieve what you want to achieve. So I mentioned Grapes of Wrath, and somebody made this point about sort of great American novels, which is, very marginally tied to this conversation, but that a lot of them have a focus on either the struggles of poverty or the goals of overcoming poverty. And it's like, yeah, you think about all sort of the great American stuff. That's a big theme, right? And it's part of the sort of the American dream. And like, is that part of a problem, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We bash happiness quite a bit on this podcast, but or is it just the opportunity to create something from nothing? I would say that's probably more the American dream. You can come with nothing and start something, which is a lot harder to do in other jurisdictions. But so in our context, you can see why people would feel more hopeless when they're like, I should be able to buy a house or to do this or whatever just by working hard, right? And more, it's like, no, you can't.
Yeah, and you see Canada getting slammed for not having of an environment that is favorable towards business.
Yeah,
and basically just punishing anyone who has ambition, which is just disincentivizing them, right? Or other places incentivize them more. But yeah, if you strive for anything valuable here in this country, we will punish you through taxation, fees, red tape, whatever it is. So yeah, creating that environment, I think America does that quite well. But
yeah. So maybe we should wrap up there a little bit. I mean, what is the conclusion to the question, should you wait to buy real estate? Like, generally, no.
Yeah, I think if you look at real estate as an asset, I look at this from the investment perspective. Like the home ownership thing, I think, is a much more personal conversation that has a lot of layers to it that you can't factor in when you're looking at an investment property. Like, do you like to live in this area? It doesn't really matter if you like to. Will a good tenant like to live in this area, right? So there's totally different, can I see my kids out in the backyard? Well, maybe there is no backyard, but the type of tenant you're trying to attract is perfectly fine with it. Exactly, right? So those personal things, I think you can maybe make your own personal decisions and adjust your expectations according to your ability and all these cultural things that we're talking about. But on the investment side, waiting in terms of, assembling a team, getting the right resources, just familiarizing, like if you're new to the whole country, right? Like where exactly do I want to be? Like do some research. Don't just jump in blindly, right? I don't think that's what we're saying. But waiting for the sake of, over analyzing or fear, or, this is so risky, or I think, next year will be a better time. Just reconsider those arguments, and I would reconsider them in a longer time scale, right? And think about the speed at which you can learn by taking action. That pays a lot more than you think, and it compounds. That's another thing too, right? Not only does the value of the house compound, but your learning compounds and the speed at which these things increases, right? So I would say, like there is certainly some trade-offs by waiting. You might time the market better if you wait till next year and you buy it for a little bit cheaper, or, you might not. You cannot tell with 100% certainty, right? Just like we said, we can't make a perfect decision. So I would say, do your research, get a team, jump in and learn as fast as you can and take responsibility and grow from that responsibility.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, timing the market, right? I think I've heard many more stories of people who tried to time it and got priced out than people who tried to time it and paid more than they should have. But over the long term, like it worked out okay, right? Like, I overpaid, but 10 years later, it doesn't really matter. Yeah. I could have saved some money up front, but
the price goes up over time. The maintenance becomes a little bit more work, but you also get better at it. And the rent goes up. The mortgage usually stays about the same, right? Unless you refinance and pull more money out, in which case you're buying a second property or you're investing somewhere else. So yeah, those things grow over time, right?
Yeah, I think just in just economic terms or money terms, right? For the average Canadian, where do they have the opportunity to get an asset with cheap leveraged debt that is a very as safe an investment as you can get, probably, right? We didn't mention the leverage too much. We've talked about it, but that's really the secret sauce of real estate investing, is that you can buy an asset by paying 20% of it, but you get 100% of the equity growth, of the cash flow, also of the problems. But that's the reason real estate investing works, really, is the leverage compared to other stuff. If you had to buy houses cash, be a whole different story. It would probably still be good, but it wouldn't be the same thing. So you can buy it at 1/5 of the price, or put 20% down. So you're getting that cheap debt. You're closer to the money printer, and you're getting assets, right?
All right. So don't be rash, get some cheap debt, get an asset that pays you some money, go build some responsibility, and learn the hard way. And then we'll see you in 30 years.
In 30 years, we'll have you on the podcast.
All right, Mark.
Okay, well, hopefully that was some value to you folks. We enjoyed it. And until next time,
steward your wealth wisely. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Two Stewards Show. If you like my voice better, click subscribe.
If you like my voice better, click share.
If you like both, give us a 5-star rating.
To learn more about the show, head on over to twostewards.ca and explore our free resources. To interact with the show, feel free to reach out at hello@twostewards.ca.
We will see you in the next episode. In the meantime, steward your wealth wisely.
Nailed it.